A few years ago, some thieves broke into a church in New York City. But the thieves didn't steal any money. They didn't take any computers or office equipment. No, what they stole was Jesus. You see, in the front of that church's sanctuary, they had a 200-pound plaster figure of Jesus. But the thing is, that figure of Jesus was bolted to a cross. But the thieves, instead of taking the cross and all of them, they took the time to unbolt Jesus from the cross. And they took Jesus and left the cross behind. In a very real sense, that's what the disciple named Peter was doing here in this story that we heard today from the Gospel of Mark. Peter wanted Jesus, but he didn't want the cross. Up until this time, Peter had witnessed how Jesus had cast demons out of people, and how he had caused the crippled to walk, and the blind to see, and the deaf to hear. Up until this time, Peter had witnessed how Jesus had taught the crowds about the ways of God with great power. And he had witnessed how huge throngs of people had gathered around Jesus and how they hung on his every word. But all of a sudden, without any warning, Jesus turned to Peter and the other disciples and told them that very soon all that was going to change, because the religious leaders were going to conspire against him and have him killed. But then, after 3 days, Jesus said, he would rise again. Well, to put it mildly, Peter didn't like what Jesus was saying. And so Peter took Jesus aside and began to scold him, saying, Jesus, are you nuts? What are you doing talking about suffering and death? People don't want to hear about those sorts of things. Jesus, don't you realize that you have a good thing going on here? You have these huge crowds of people that are following you around everywhere you go. But Jesus, you're going to lose those people. And you're going to lose me if you keep up this talk about suffering and death. Essentially, Peter was giving Jesus an ultimatum. Peter was saying, Jesus, we're willing to be loyal to you as long as you live up to the expectations that we have of you. But if you let us down and don't do what we want you to do, then we're done with you. We'll drop you in a heartbeat and go find someone else to follow. That's the same sort of attitude that many Christians had back during the Middle Ages. You see, back then, not only did many countries have patron saints, such as St. Patrick was the patron saint of Ireland, but also many cities had patron saints as well. The city would pick a saint and they would honor him by putting up a large statue in a prominent place in the city. They would usually name the largest church in the town after that saint, and they would generally hold the patron saint in high esteem. And basically the people figured that if they honored their patron saint in that way, then the saint had an obligation to watch over them and to protect them and to generally make sure that good things happened in the city. And the way that people back then thought was that if the patron saint failed to keep up his end of the bargain by allowing bad things to happen in the city, like some deadly disease that might begin to spread, or if there was a crop failure out in the fields around the city, then the people figured that they had every right to fire their patron saint. And back in the Middle Ages, there was an actual ceremony that they had for doing that. The people would come together and take down the statue of their saint, march it outside the city walls, and then proceed to bury the statue in the ground. And then they would go back into the city and choose a new patron saint, who they trusted would do a better job than the old one. But the people knew that if that new patron saint let them down as well, that they wouldn't hesitate to fire him too. But even though Peter gave Jesus a similar kind of ultimatum, threatening that he and the other disciples would dump Jesus and go and find someone else they would follow, Jesus didn't back off. Instead, Jesus upped the ante by saying, "If any want to be my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their lives will lose them. But whoever loses their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it." Take up your cross and follow me. Our problem today, though, is that when we hear those words of Jesus, is that we almost immediately translate it into some soft, tame metaphor. We say something like, well, the guy that delivers my Post-Gazette, every morning he throws my newspaper in the bushes. I guess that's a cross I have to bear. Or in the summertime you say, oh, my neighbor's dandelion seeds keep blowing into my yard. Well, I guess that's just a cross I have to bear. In other words, when Jesus tells us to take up our cross and follow him, we assume that all he really means is that we should be prepared to put up with the petty little annoyances that come our way in life. But back in the first century, when Jesus first spoke those words, "Take up your cross and follow me," people knew what Jesus meant when he said the word cross. They knew that he meant a real, live cross. After all, about 20 years earlier, when Jesus was around 10 years old, the Romans had come through and had crucified some 2,000 Jews in Jesus' hometown region of Galilee because they had spoken out and protested the Roman occupation of their land. So there's no doubt that the people that Jesus talked to, that they knew what a cross was. But when Jesus told his followers to take up their cross and follow him, he wasn't asking them to have some sort of a death wish. But what Jesus was asking was for them to commit themselves to being his disciples.